Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me with Parents Know Best Education Initiative here at FreedomWorks. Our public schools should be one of the safest places in a child's life. And yet we have seen a dramatic increase in school violence, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And to discuss this topic, this critical topic in schools, I am joined by Max Eden. Max is a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and the lead of AEI's Conservative Education Reform Network. And we are also joined by Quisha King, B.E.S.T's Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs. So welcome, you guys. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Quisha, thank you for talking to us while you're in the middle of a hurricane.
Anything for parents know best.
That's right. I love it. So as I alluded to, and as both of you are going to tell us so much more about, safety ought to be the priority in our schools. Parents want to know that as they drop their children off at their local public school, it is a safe place for them. And unfortunately, school leaders have been impacted by the Obama-era 2014 Dear Colleague letter, calling to post ever lower statistics related to troubling and violent behavior. Moms and dads, that makes no sense to me, and I'm sure it makes no sense to you whatsoever. So Max, you said in your congressional testimony on school violence, do I have that right? Congressional
Yes.
Committee?
Yes.
And how wonderful that you could go before them and share your expertise on this topic and have that influence. So you said that historically the mantra of vigilance is if you see something, say something. I mean, I think all of us that are watching this or listening to this, yes, we've heard that mantra and it makes sense. It's good. But in too many schools, principals are now essentially told if you see something, don't say or do anything. I mean, that is just mind-boggling because apparently if you do, you'll be the one that gets in trouble. So a lot of those were your words. I pulled those from your testimony. So Max, help us understand the Obama Dear Colleague letter and how that changed how violence is monitored and reported in schools.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Obama Dear Colleague letter was launched as kind of a proto-critical race theory effort to fight what they called the school to prison pipeline. And they saw a couple of things in the statistics they thought were deeply problematic and decided to use kind of federal pressure to address that, right? They saw that there was a substantial disparity in school discipline by race and by disability, and they saw that students who were disciplined were more likely later on to drop out. And so with their kind of do-gooder technocratic proto-woke hats on, they thought, oh, well, we need to reduce these disparities, we need to reduce these numbers. And they kind of leverage the power of the federal government in ways that we can get into in a little bit to pressure school districts to kind of eschew the traditional model of discipline, detentions, suspensions, expulsions, and the most severe misbehavior in favor of what they called restorative justice, kind of a talk-based, almost therapeutic approach to school discipline, which frankly, maybe it can work sometimes, but it's not a replacement for actual enforcement of the rules. So what will really happen at the end of the day, and it certainly wasn't their intent, but it was obvious as a consequence, is when school superintendents, school principals feel this pressure coming down from the federal government to lower your numbers, lower your disparities, the easiest way to do that is to simply not discipline or to not record when you discipline students.
Wow, it's just mind-boggling, isn't it? So you mentioned in your testimony some really poignant stories, and I know we're going to hear at least one story like that from Quisha in a moment. Give us some examples of the change in the reporting of violence. You talked about something in Parkland, which we're all familiar with, which was devastating, Broward, and Broward counties, and then also in New York City were a few examples you cited.
Yeah, so I mean, the example in Parkland, which was in Broward County, which was kind of taken to be the model in many ways for the policies that were pushed by the federal government through this Dear Colleague letter. When you track the Parkland shooter's history, you'll see that when he was in middle school, before these school policies kind of came into vogue, he was suspended almost every other day. There was just an extensive record of the student's misconduct. He was eventually transferred to a specialized school. When he was put back into a traditional public school, though, all of a sudden this pressure existed. And, as I went talking to students and teachers, I heard that he was in the office all the time. I heard about all these different things that he would do, giving dead animals to students, jumping out from behind poles and screaming about students, bringing knives to school. But he was only disciplined once in his first full semester there, and that happened to be on a day when his traditional assistant principal was off campus. So you can kind of see just in his one example, a case where the administrators were under pressure themselves to not look like they had a chaotic school, to not look like they were over disciplining. And in that case, it led to a lack of recording of really seriously problematic behavior that if it had been recorded, maybe he could have gotten sent back to the specialized school that he used to be in. In New York, they changed the system so that basically, at first it was you can get suspended in a first mid-level offense. Then they changed it to it had to be the third mid-level offense. No huge problems in the data there. Where it really became problematic was they then changed it to after a third offense, a principal has to submit a petition in writing to the central office district for permission to suspend a student. And as you can imagine, per what we were talking about earlier, the dynamic is, the central office doesn't want you to write that. They're not going to look favorably upon it. You're going to be discouraged from writing it. That means you're going to be discouraged from suspending students. And that means going all the way down, the kids just know that there's a higher leeway for misbehavior. And when I looked at the data for New York public schools, you saw a large number of schools, especially a majority of schools serving largely low-income minority students, where a higher percentage of students said that there was gang activity, a higher percentage of students said they didn't feel safe, a higher percentage of students said they didn't feel respected. And it makes perfect sense when you think about it, but if all you're looking at is the numbers from a distance and you're thinking, I'm trying to socially engineer for social justice, you don't think about those effects at the end of the day.
Yes. And this has been very eye-opening to me, and I'm assuming to a lot of parents that will be watching this, to make this connection between some of these, characteristics, if you will, of these students that we heard about when these incidents occurred and the news was everywhere and, it was heavily covered. And we were just like scratching our heads. How could this happen? How could this person be roaming the halls of the school? And to connect it, of course, we heard that they had prior activities and, yet they were still in the school. But connecting it to this Obama-era policy, this Dear Colleague letter in 2014, is very new to me. And we will be sure and link to that from this episode so that parents can understand and learn more about this woke agenda that, has been going on for a lot longer than since COVID. So, Quisha, I want to kick it over to you. You have your own story, of course, and experiences. You've just written an op-ed on school violence for Parents Know Best. And you mentioned a horrible incident in a school with an autistic child being abused. It wasn't reported to the state and apparently was downgraded in its severity. Which just to me seems so unjust and unfair. Now, the parents, I think, did have a lawsuit and they won some money, but tell us more about this and help us understand your thoughts on that incident and also things that are happening in Florida.
Sure. So it first came to mind, I heard of restorative justice. I knew it was a problem, but like you, Max is the heavens and know what was going on. But I, like you, Tamra, didn't realize the magnitude of quite frankly, the felonies that were happening inside of the school, the classrooms. We had a report here in Duval County. There were hundreds of felonies that were being committed inside the school, not just student to student, but students towards the teachers as well. And all of this was being hidden, swept under the rug by the school officers, the police officers. So in Duval County, it's separated. So we have our sheriff's office who handles the large, and then we have a separate school police that handles violence or issues within the schools. And that particular the chief was sweeping under the rug all of these violent accounts of violence, and it was just horrific. And like you mentioned, there was an autistic student who was sexually assaulted several times, and it was unreported. And this is not even the first story that I've heard of sexual acts, sexual abuse being happening to children, and not no one ringing the alarm for these children, no one coming to their aid and rescue. And instead, we get, people like Obama and their letters and their plans for restorative justice to say, oh, well, it's too many instances where this is happening, with minority kids being the perpetrators of the violence. So we need to have more. We want to close those gaps. Well, that is not compassion to me. That is not. It is not compassionate. It is not empathetic, and it is not showing that you care about children of any color. If something wrong is happening and no one is addressing it, it is going to incentivize more bad behavior. And so it doesn't matter what color the child is. If they are committing acts of violence, it needs to be addressed so it can be corrected. Yes. That is, when you address these things in a way that helps the student realize their wrongs, it can be corrected. Instead, I think it's going to further the prison to pipeline, kids more going in that direction, because no one is correcting these instances. There's no discipline when it's happening. So that's right. It's a huge problem, and I think we need to speak up more about this.
I think we do. And you both have opened my eyes as we've been preparing for having this conversation. And if you think about it, a hallmark of the American way is the rule of law. Yes, you are innocent until proven guilty. But if you are guilty and there's no recourse, or you haven't even gone through a process for your activities to be judged properly according to the law, it just breaks down the beautiful justice system. It's not perfect. It's never been perfect. But it is a perfect concept, and it's very sad to see that under attack by no less than a presidential administration. Thank you for sharing that. Max, you say that the nationwide sea change in school discipline was engineered through coercion, secretly by bureaucrats, and that it has caused fear in principals. We touched on this, but now we're going a little deeper, to comply, and in teachers who also fear retaliation to report these issues to the press or to others. So expound on that a little bit. And what I want to add to that, what would you recommend they do? Should they push back and go ahead and report? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So, you're talking about kind of the justice system and the rule of law, and that was effectively kind of subverted by administrative fiat, right? We have civil rights laws in America. They're very important laws. In education, they come with a very severe consequence if they're violated, right? Yes. We have the Federal Office for Civil Rights. If they find that a school has seriously, violated the law, they have the power to take away all of the money from that school, right? Wow. So the law says you can't discriminate based on race. The way that the Office for Civil Rights used to administer that was basically if a black student and a white student both committed the same offense, and the white student was punished more leniently, the black student more severely, that's different treatment. That's disparate treatment. That's against the law.
Absolutely.
But change the standard from disparate treatment to disparate impact. So basically, if a black student and a white student both did the same thing and got punished equally, it may or may not be a civil rights violation depending on the racial composition of the school district. And given that there are these kind of statistical disparities in a lot of school districts, this gave the Obama administration's Department of Education the ability to open investigations into districts that weren't really investigations because they knew the numbers going into them. They held the threat of taking out all the federal money from them, and basically said the only way for these investigations to end is if you agree to adopt our policies and if you can show reductions in, disparities in absolute numbers and discipline. So that is something that will absolutely affect the way that schools are governed. They did these investigations to at least about 350 school districts serving over 10 million students directly. It quickly caught on as just the faddish social justice thing to do because the argument was, compelling enough on its face, right? Reduce racial disparities, stop the school to prison pipeline. But as we've discussed, and as Quisha has also, given us a story about, the easiest way to do that is to simply not enforce the rules. And all of a sudden there's a pressure to not do so. If you're a superintendent, you were afraid of these investigations. If you're a principal, you're reasonably afraid of your superintendent. If you're a teacher, you have a reason to be somewhat afraid of your principal. And so the whole feedback loop about behavior breaks down fundamentally when somebody puts his thumb on the scale from a distance and says, we're not going to be judging you by how safe things actually are. We're going to be judging you by how safe things look to us from a distance on paper. So, the number one thing I would recommend school board members do in particular, because we've seen a lot of, especially in Florida, a lot of new school board members.
Yes.
We have to kind of restore the information feedback loops. Right? We can't have teachers who feel too intimidated to speak out about what's going on. They have to be given the opportunity to speak anonymously about what they're seeing. The teachers who see the stuff that Quisha is talking about deserve to be able to say it to parents without fear of retaliation. They need a kind of anonymous forum where they can say, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm experiencing, and parents can get that direct, unfiltered view in the classroom, and then they can go to school board members, the superintendent, and say, hey, I don't care about your social justice, school to prison pipeline, restorative justice agenda. All I know is that some teacher said this is happening, some teacher said that's happening. These are unacceptable. We need you to enforce rules again.
That's great. So start with the school boards, and of course, we know parents can put pressure on school boards. Quisha, while all of this is chaos and hopefully in process to being remedied, but it's probably a bit of a long road, probably more doable, in those districts that are more conservative, more, respectful of the rule of law, et cetera, where we might see some change sooner rather than later. It's just a big question mark. In the meantime, give parents here that are listening just some thoughts on choice in education. I know you are very devoted to working on that in Florida and other states with Parents Know Best. Help parents understand why they don't have to keep their kids in schools when they don't feel they're safe.
I mean, safety is first. When we were first talking about this behind the scenes, you said that safety is the number one goal. And because if you don't feel safe, you're not going to learn. You're certainly not going to be open to learning if you're just constantly, your head is on a swivel every time you enter a classroom. Yeah. And, that really can affect, not only the administrators and the teachers, but the children. The children are not going to feel like they are in a safe environment, and that can really shut a child down. That can shut an adult down, yes. Let alone children. So when we are thinking about where our children are going to be going to school, if you, as a parent, you're going to really have to ask some hard questions to these administrators. What is really going on? And if they cannot provide you with an excellent answer, especially your child, I say, you guys know, get them out. We should not be sacrificing our children on at the feet of some bureaucrat who some social justice agenda. That is not my kid's problem. For you to go and do your bureaucrat stuff. My kid will not be will not have to pay the cost of at their expense. So my goal is to help children, families get their kids into safe, productive learning environments. And, if that means pulling them out of a traditional public school, so be it. They have a short window of time to learn. As my kids get older, I'm watching them grow up, and it goes by so fast. It goes by so fast. And you cannot discount that when your children are growing up. And so you have a small window of time to make sure they're getting the education that they need. So I encourage every parent to ask your children, because my daughter actually was the one who recorded a conversation in her school where critical race theory was going on. gone are the days where when your kid comes home and you can say, "Oh, how was your day?" And they say, nothing really happened. And you just kind of move on to the next topic. No, we have to really be probing our children of what is happening in their classrooms.
Yes.
And, if things are coming up that are unacceptable, do whatever you can to get them out.
Yes. It may have been for some different reasons in 2011 when our son was in, he was a freshman at the public high school because he went from the charter school there because he was a football player and he wanted to play with a better team. And, at Christmas, I felt so compelled to ask him, do you want to come home for schooling to do an online schooling program? He did not miss a beat. He said yes. And I think sometimes we underestimate the influence that we have as parents, the fact that our kids are probably thinking about things that are making them uncomfortable. And then when we open up a door for them, it might be the best thing for them. For others, that's not the best thing. That's where our parental rights and our parental authority can come in, where we can choose and do what we think is best for our kids. So thank you. I love your story, Quisha, and I love everything you're doing. Max, I just want to kick it to you if you have any final comments.
No, I mean, I think the only final comment is just kind of what Quisha said, right? I mean, parents need to ask students detailed questions about what's going on when it comes to the way that other students are behaving. And then they need to ask their teachers these questions. They need to ask their teachers, do you feel supported by your school administrators? Do you feel as though they have your back when there's a student who misbehaves? And, also very importantly, are there kids in the school who really should not be there? And those are all bits of information that I think parents, will not naturally get anymore through the course of the grapevine like we might have once used to. You need to ask your kids, you need to ask your kids' teachers, and you need to, be prepared to either say something to a principal, a school board member, a superintendent. And sometimes that thing might have to be, if you can't get this resolved, I'll take my kid out.
Yes.
Maybe the end result is that you take your kid out at the end of the day. Maybe you and 15 other parents saying that at the same time convince the superintendent or principal, I have to deal with this, or else I could actually lose kids and lose money.
Yes, that's good.
People who run schools run them with goodwill, sure, but they also run them in response to incentives that are set for them. And if parents don't have information, then they don't get to set those incentives. Only bad information that gets sent up through spreadsheets going to bureaucrats will create the incentives that principals and teachers will have to operate under, which aren't incentives that are set with an eye towards whether or not your kid is safe.
That's so good. Well, thank you both for joining me today. If you are watching this right now on social media or from our website, please send us your comments, your questions. We will connect you with the resources, the mentoring, the information that you need. We are here to support you as you do your best to raise your kids and raise them in safety. And you certainly can share with your kids and encourage them that if they see something, they should say something to you, at least to you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Quisha and Max. It was great to have you.
Thank you.